started with a joke. A single line from Jimmy Kimmel that, at first, sounded like something his audience had heard many times before. Late-night shows are built on humor, satire, and pushing boundaries. And for years, Kimmel has done exactly that. But this time, the reaction was different. During his monologue, Kimmel made a comment about Melania Trump, describing her as glowing like an expectant widow. It was delivered as a joke, something intended to land as humor, not controversy. But it didn't stay that way. Within hours, the line began spreading beyond the show's audience. Clips circulated online, and the tone of the conversation quickly shifted. What was meant as satire started being interpreted in a much more serious way. And then came the response. The backlash wasn't just from viewers or critics. It reached much higher. Soon, the situation escalated into something far bigger than a late-night joke. Because now, it wasn't just about what was said. It was about how it was being understood. And that's when everything changed. As the clip continued to spread, the interpretation of the joke became the center of the conversation. Some viewers saw it as typical late-night humor, edgy, exaggerated, and meant to provoke a reaction. Others saw something else entirely, interpreting the line as crossing a line that shouldn't have been crossed. But the most significant response came from outside the audience. Donald Trump publicly reacted, calling for Kimmel to be fired. What had started as a single joke had now escalated into a political moment. And that changed the tone immediately. Now, it wasn't just entertainment. It became a public conflict. The focus shifted away from the joke itself and toward the reaction it triggered. People began debating not just what Kimmel said, but whether it was appropriate, whether it went too far, and whether the response it received was justified. At the same time, another layer of the story started to emerge. Kimmel's original intention. According to him, the line wasn't meant to suggest anything harmful. It was an age-gap joke, something rooted in exaggeration rather than hostility. And he made it clear that those criticizing him likely understood that as well. But by that point, the interpretation had already taken on a life of its own. Because once a statement reaches that level of attention, it stops being controlled by the person who said it. It becomes shaped by how people choose to see it. And that's exactly what was happening. The more people talked about it, the bigger it became. And the original context started to fade. When Jimmy Kimmel returned to his show, there was no avoiding it. He addressed the situation immediately, but instead of reacting with anger or defensiveness, he approached it differently. With humor. You know how sometimes you wake up in the morning and the First Lady puts out a statement demanding you be fired from your job? He said to his audience. We've all been there, right? The line landed exactly how it was meant to, not as a direct confrontation, but as a way of reframing the situation. By turning it into a joke, Kimmel shifted the tone. What had become a serious public dispute was brought back into the space he was most comfortable in, comedy. But underneath that humor, there was a clear message. He wasn't backing down. At the same time, he didn't escalate the situation further. Instead, he leaned into what he does best, using humor to respond rather than confrontation. And that approach changed how the story was perceived. For some, it reinforced the idea that the original comment was never meant to be taken literally. For others, it didn't change their view at all. But either way, the narrative had shifted, because now, the focus wasn't just on what he said. It was on how he responded. And that response made one thing clear. In moments like this, the reaction can become just as important as the original statement. Sometimes even more. Because in the end, it's not just about what starts the story. It's about how it's handled when it spreads.